Hello everyone and welcome back to another reading wrap up. We are going to run through every book that I read in May of this year. I read around 30 books. Not as big of a reading month as I had in April, but still a ridiculous amount of books, which I think makes my t-shirt for this video very fitting. I am an absolutely feral reader. I'm just very passionate and I like to read all the time when I can, when I have free time, and I get very invested in my books. I'm gonna go through what I read chronologically in the order that I read them because I tried to film this video for my TikTok wrap up and I kept forgetting books. In the last reading wrap up we finished with me getting to book 7 in the Zodiac Academy. I started these books at the end of April and they ran over into May. So I did finish them in May. I read books 8 and 8.5 together in tandem. They were Sorrow and Starlight and Beyond the Veil because 8.5 is sort of a novella, but it's still huge and it happens chronologically in the same timeline as book 8. One is what's happening in the world of Solaria in the Zodiac Academy books, and the other is happening Beyond the Veil with like two groups of characters. So you can tandem read them. I found tandem reading chapters on Reddit and that's how I read them. It took me days. It was a very long read, and a lot of the stuff in Beyond the Veil, you're not getting too much extra content that's happening in terms of like plot points, but you are getting like a lot more context in terms of what is happening to certain characters. So some of the references and things that happen later on are you might not get, but you don't have to read it. I obviously did because I love the Zodiac Academy. I gave the books 4 stars together because I read them in tandem. They're just so long. I feel like the Zodiac Academy, once you get to book like 7, 8, 8.5, it starts to dip a little bit. Even book 6, there's just so much extra content that could be cut out, which I don't personally mind because I'll do anything to stay in that world like a little bit longer and with those characters, but it does start to drag a little bit then. Obviously book 9 only just recently came out last month, so I finished that and I cried at the end. It was such an end of an era finishing the Zodiac Academy. I was like, I don't know what to do with my life anymore. I felt sort of the same way finishing that as I did when I finished ACOTAR and Throne of Glass. Like I was like, I've just read like 12 books in this book series in this world, and what am I going to do with my life now? So for me it was 5 stars. Again, pages could have been cut out or cut down, but it was such like an emotional ending and everything wrapped up, and I was so happy with the ending that we got and the closure and how it ended and what happened for the characters after. We got a sneak peek into how they lived their lives after the events that happened. So that was 5 stars for me. For me, Zodiac Academy is a 5-star series. I will always recommend it. Is it the best writing ever? No, but it's fun. It's such a vibe. The books give me 5-star feeling. I love the characters, I love the world, I love the dynamics. I just love those books. Which obviously meant that immediately after I had to go and start the prequel series, which was the Ruthless Boys of the Zodiac. There are 5 books in these. I gave book 1 5 stars. For me, Dark Fae is what I wanted Crescent City to be in terms of like an urban fantasy with a murder mystery. It's about this main character, Elise. Her brother is murdered. He went to one of these academies in the world of Solaria. If you'd read the Zodiac Academy, you know, you have an understanding of the map of the city. This is more of like a rundown part of the world that they live in. This magical school is one of the worst ranking magical schools, but it's still a magical school, so like you have to have scholarships to go or money. Her brother got a scholarship to go to this academy and he died there. They said it was a suicide, but she knows that it wasn't, so she gets a scholarship herself, or hacks the system too, and gets enrolled there and goes there with the mission of trying to figure out who killed her brother. And she meets 4 different fae who are called like the kings of the academy. 2 of them are opposite rival gang leaders. One of them's like the most powerful in the school, the other's the most popular. So you have that sort of vibe going on where there's different romance interests and like a love square. But this is a reverse harem book, which I didn't really understand what that meant when I was first reading it, because I don't really do spicy books. Like if spice is in it, that's fine, but like I don't read for spice. These are spicy books. Do with that information what you will. I was not even fazed by that. The group of characters, similarly to Zodiac Academy, the way that the Twisted Sisters write their group of characters, I just love the dynamics and the relationships, and there's so much banter. Individual books in the series, ratings varied from like 4.5 to 3.75 stars, but 5 stars for the first book. Like I think it's a 4-star series for me. I really enjoyed it. And then of course there is a spin-off series after the Zodiac Academy called Darkmore Penitentiary, which follows one of the characters who's in the Ruthless Boys of Zodiac and Zodiac Academy, and it's like her story after, where she goes through Darkmore Penitentiary, which is like the prison in this world. So the books were given like Orange is the New Black, but Zodiac Academy. really fun. Very intense, a lot of things happening, a lot of alliances, and again, another reverse harem. There's only 3 books in Darkmore Penitentiary and it's an incomplete series, whereas Zodiac Academy and the Ruthless Boys Zodiac are complete. 4-star series for me, and it was left on a cliffhanger. I want the next book. I don't know when we're gonna get it, if we are, but incomplete series, so it's 4 stars. Then I did a 24-hour reading challenge, which you might have seen. That's where these books came into. I read Belladonna. I loved the Shepherd King duology that I read last month, and I wanted to read another gothic fantasy, and Belladonna is a gothic fantasy. A lot of people recommend it after reading One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns, and this gave me all the gothic fantasy vibes. Someone asked me what gothic fantasy was, if it's like scary. It's not. I'd say that gothic fantasy is like an aesthetic, like a feeling. It's a time period and fashion choices and the overall atmosphere of like a book. It gives like Regency or Victoria era, very old times, with like a darker twist. It's not necessarily meaning that it's gonna be more evil or scarier, usually related to like dark monsters and death and things like that. Death is a character in here. Death is a reaper, and death is kinda I thought this was really fun to read. I really loved the writing. I thought it was really beautiful. I tabbed a few quotes. I just thought it was very magical, and I do want to keep reading on. I haven't picked up the second book yet, so this was 4.25 stars. And in that reading challenge after, I wanted a little palette cleanser, so we picked up Wild Love by Elsie Silver. This is my first Elsie Silver book. I have the Chestnut Spring series, which I'm going to read next because I loved this. This is like a billionaire romance. It's main female character, her older brother's best friend that she grew up with is a billionaire and runs a music company, and they reconnect after like years apart. Her life sort of falls apart in the city, so she moves back and starts working for him in his music company. There's like a single dad trope. The banter and the tension is so fun. I really enjoyed this, and I really loved both of the characters. I read this obviously in one sitting because it was during my 24-hour reading challenge, but I flew through this. It was so fun and I wanted more. It's called the Rose Hill series and there's more books coming, so we already have the name of book 2 that's coming. I don't know how many are going to come, but I will be reading all of them. From the same 24-hour reading vlog, which I will link in the description so you can go and watch me read these books if you haven't already, I read The Crimson Moth, and this was 4.5 stars for me. Immediately after I finished the book and put it down, I went and pre-ordered book 2 because I think it's a duology, which isn't coming until like next year. I think this was my first like witch book. This was also another like Regency era or Victorian era book, which was very fun. In this world, witches used to run the kingdom and sit on the throne, but they were evil. They ended up getting overthrown, and when they were overthrown because they were evil, it was decided that all witches would die, so there would be no other witches to come in and try and take back power and sort of maintain this level of society. Witches were killed and murdered and hunted, and there's supposed to be no more witches left. But our main female character, Rune, is a witch. She's quite wealthy, she's a socialite in society, but she acts like she's dumb and she doesn't know what she's doing, and it diverts attention from her being a witch savior. She basically, when she hears about witches that have been found and are gonna get killed, she goes and she rescues them. So she's like this vigilante for witches. And the main male character is a witch hunter, so his job is to kill the witches. Enemies to lovers, betrayal, really fun. I will say though, dual perspective chapters, like one chapter will focus on Gideon, the next one will focus on Rune, but it's written in third person, or I think a mix between first and third person, so that could get a little bit like confusing at times, but I really enjoyed getting to see both sides of the characters. Then I read Divine Rivals. This is a booktube and book talk classic. I'm always looking for fantasy book recommendations. These would always come up. This is a young adult fantasy duology. So first book, Divine Rivals, and the second book, Ruthless Vows. Honestly, I wasn't too sure what I was getting into with these books. All the recommendations and reviews I have seen were mainly just about the tropes in this, which are like academic rivals, enemies to lovers. But the plot itself, I sort of went in blind. I didn't really want to look up too much and know what was going on. And I would say I preferred book 1. It was a 4-star read for me. Book 2 was like around 3.75, but like together I rated them both 4 stars. I think the writing in this is some of the most beautiful writing I have ever read. It was so enchanting and magical. The two main characters on this cover here, Iris and Roman, work at a newspaper together, but there's only one job spot So they are fighting or writing to win this position, and Iris comes from like a lower class, poorer family with less opportunity. She's dropped out of school, whereas Roman's family is very rich. So there's this like dynamic and banter between them where they're arguing for different assignments to try and show their writing worth so they can, you know, win this position. But Iris can't stand Roman. She lives with her mum, and her brother's been enlisted in the war, and the war is where the fantasy element come in. So the war is a war between a god and a goddess who were like husband and wife, and the wife betrayed the husband, so he started this war in this world to try and like track her down and kill her. The gods and the goddesses have recruited the mortals and the people in this world to fight in their armies for them. So that's, I'd say, where like most of the fantasy bits come from. Iris has a typewriter, and she tries to write letters for her brother in the war because she misses him, and she puts them in her wardrobe and they disappear. She thought, you know what, I'm just gonna keep writing. I don't know where my letters are going. She thought they're probably not going anywhere. No one else is gonna read them. So it's almost more like a therapeutic thing, but it turns out Roman receives the letters. So there's like magical elements there with inanimate objects. I just think it's a cozy fantasy book. Like, this would be so fun to read in like the fall season. Or if you are a romance reader who wants to get into fantasy, this is probably a good place to start. Very heartwarming, but it doesn't have like a lot of fast pace action and drama. So like if you're looking for like a typical fantasy book, probably not your thing. It might be a little bit boring. I feel like if you like Once Upon a Broken Heart and Caraval and those type of young adult fantasy books, you'll like this. I read The Veiled Kingdom on Kindle Unlimited. It was a new release. There is a second book coming. It's all anyone on Book Talk I've seen has been recommending. I really liked the idea and the premise of the story, the plot. It had me in the first half, but I feel like first of all the book was so short that I didn't have enough time to connect with the characters before the script flipped, basically. The second half, I was sort of like, whoa, we went from 0 to 100 and things started happening, and I was like, this feels like it's come out of nowhere. Like, we've not had enough build up to it. I wouldn't say it's a slow burn book. I'd say it's quite an insta-lovey book, and I just don't think those are for me personally. But I know people who love like insta-lovey and spicy stuff, because the second half of this book is spicy. I can see why they love it. I just wanted more plot. I wanted more slower burn. I wanted to connect more with the characters in the story before everything started happening. I will read the second book because, again, it's so short. It was very easy to read. The ending made me feel weird. Like, I did not enjoy that ending. So for me, it was 2.5 stars. I got an ARC on my Kindle. It was for an independently published book. We love indie authors. And this was The Mad King and the False Queen. This was a 5-star read for me. It was so fun. I don't know if my expectations just weren't like super high going into it, because obviously I've not read anything by these authors before and I had like nothing to compare it to. I just think this is such a fun fantasy book. I will be recommending this for people who are trying to get into fantasy or just love a fun fantasy read. Plot is basically the name. The book is set in a magical kingdom, and it's dual perspective with 2 female main characters. They're best friends. One is the princess and one is the king's assassin. Both grew up together in the castle. The princess's father, the king, ends up getting murdered and basically leaves the princess in charge. And for her to figure out who killed her family and, you know, have some sort of power in the realm, she was proposed an alliance with the Mad King, but the princess and the assassin swap places. So the assassin wants to figure out who killed the king because she was the king's assassin, and she's trying to keep the princess safe. So they go, let's swap places. The assassin pretends to be the princess and goes to marry this Mad King because she's suspicious of him. And then the princess, when her family get murdered, she was just coming into her elemental powers, and now she doesn't know how to harness them or how to use them or what to do with them. She goes off on her own journey to find other rulers of this realm who have magical powers who could help her. So they both have their own sort of subplots to follow. There's a love triangle, there's, you know, enemies to lovers, but there's separate stories, separate love interests. So there's like 2 different things happening at once. And I thought it was so fun. It had all my favorite tropes in it. It was so easy to read. I didn't want to put it down. It is left on like a cliffhanger ending because book 2 is coming out in December and I cannot wait. But I think like if you want to get into fantasy or you want like a really easy, light, fun fantasy read this. I then started From Blood and Ash. I started it in my Only Reading Fantasy Books for 7 Days vlog, but this is one of the most recommended books or book series to read after like ACTA and Throne of Glass. So I picked it up. I think the series is incomplete. There's also a prequel series and there's a reading order. I think it's the publishing order that you can read. There are 5 or 6 books out in the Blood and Ash series, and then there's also Flesh and Fire, which is the prequel series, but you can read them at the same time. So I'm going to be doing that. I loved this. This was 4.25 stars for me, but I can see why people either love it or hate it. I feel like the writing style is heavily descriptive. You have a scene happen, it will be shown, you'll read the action and the battle and the drama or whatever it is that we're reading. The chapter ends and then you start the next chapter and then it's describing in detail what we've just lived through. So it is heavily descriptive. You read about things that happen multiple times in so much depth. It is not a fast-paced book in terms of like the time frame and what happens. I'm pretty sure book 1 and book 2, when I was reading it, towards the end of book 1 and then the first like 3/4 of book 2, it was just like a week's timeline. So they're very slow, but I really enjoyed it. I didn't mind it too much. I would say this is like a book series that is harder for me to at least like sit and binge. Like it would take me a few days to get through, but I really love the characters. The story is very confusing to begin with. You have a lot of questions when I was reading this. It follows Poppy, who's a maiden in this world, so you're like, what is a maiden? You don't really know until you know. Everything is in Poppy's perspective, so you find out the answers to the story and what's happening as Poppy does. But Poppy is a maiden and she's supposed to remain pure, and her role is to help people in this world through their ascension, which is essentially supposed to be their journey from mortals to immortality. And Poppy was chosen by the gods as the maiden, and she's like this representative and has to live this clean, pure life. You assume she's gonna, you know, have some power over to help people with their ascension. But it's all a bit like blurry. You just keep reading and answers do come. You know, people around Poppy start dying. There's the Descended in this book who are sort of like a rebellion, who are against the ascension in this world. We have this almost revolution or uprising that is gonna happen or is trying to happen, and Poppy's guard, personal guard, gets murdered, and she gets a new guard who is different. He doesn't typically follow the rules. Like a maiden's not meant to be spoken to, she's not meant to look at her face, she's got to wear a veil, remain covered, keep to herself, like total isolation. And her guard sort of breaks the rules a bit and they develop a friendship, and it's their sort of journey and what happens. I thought it was really, really fun. There is enemies to lovers, there is betrayal, there is insane plot twists. Again, like I said, you don't really know what's going on in here until you read the book. Like you have so many questions, but you just have to keep reading and know that those answers will eventually come. And then I started book 2. So book 2 follows on from the ending of book 1. Again, there is a betrayal, choices, secrets. In both of these books, there's vampires and werewolves, but it's not like Twilight. It's different. It's very interesting. This book was a bit slower for me to read, and I gave this one 4 stars, but the plot twist at the end and the drama that happens, here for it. Really enjoying these. So I'm waiting for book 3 to come, and then I'm hoping I'm gonna read that this month. Then I read Heir of Broken Fate and Heir of Broken Kingdom by Mads Rafferty. There has to be other books to come in this series. So far there are only 2. They are both on Kindle Unlimited. I think this book is for the ACOTAR girlies. I think if you want like a really easy, fun read that has fae, fated mates, courts, a princess, an evil king with like a magical war coming, mythical creatures, found families, then this is like a really fun read. The first part of the first book has a lot of world building and setting up to come, and it's all important information, but I know that can be a bit slower for people to get into. I personally just like breezed through it. I read both the books very quickly. Book 1 is sort of setting up the plot and introducing you to characters, and it gives you an idea of what's to come for book 2. And then book 2 comes and it absolutely destroys you in the best way possible, but I cried at the end of book 2. Both books were 4.5 star reads for me. I love them so much. I definitely will be recommending them for people who want to get into fantasy books or like a book to read after you finish ACOTAR. I read the first book in the War of Lost Hearts trilogy, which is Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent. A lot of people were saying that if I enjoyed Six Scorched Roses and Serpent and the Wings of Night, that to read this, because this is one of her other books. I was really enjoying the first half of the book, but for me it was a 3.75 star read. I will continue reading the series, but the first part of the book, you don't really know what's going on. You're trying to figure it out. You're getting introduced to the characters. It's quite slow. You got your 2 main characters, and I liked the characters, but they weren't my favourite. Again, similar to the Serpent and the Wings of Night, and I feel like if I can't connect to characters, then it's harder for me to like really love a book. After 50% of the way through the book, it switches the way the book is written, and it goes from like first person single point of view in our main female character to dual perspective with a different character, and the plot completely changes. It threw me so off guard. It wasn't what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. When I was reading it, that's not really the type of book that I wanted to read at the time, and I wasn't connecting to the characters. So I just think that I'm such like a mood reader. The mood I'm in will affect the book I'm reading, and I just feel like I wasn't in the mood for that. So I still liked it, it just wasn't like a favorite, and I'd need to keep reading to figure out the rest of the story because I might love the other books in the trilogy. I feel like I need to finish the trilogy to give like a fair rating, but yeah, that's how I felt about that. My favorite read of the month was the Kindred's Curse saga by Penn Cole. Penn Cole is now an author that I will read anything that she publishes. If you like the politics in The Cruel Prince and you love a slow burn like ACTA, then I think you'll love this. There's a Gryvern in it, I think it's called, which is like a griffin and a wyvern. This is the slowest burn I've ever had, and I loved it. I ate up every single second of it. It was so good. Spark of the Everflame is the first book, then you have Glow of the Everflame and Heat of the Everflame, and Burn of the Everflame, the fourth book, is coming out in July. It's about a main female character, DM, who is a healer. She's immortal and she lives in a world where there are mortals and there are the Descended. The Descended have powers. The way that the kingdom is ruled, the heir to the throne isn't like a relative, it's just who has the most power, and usually, well, it's always the Descended, but usually it's from like one or two houses because they breed the strongest Descendants. So DM's mum was a healer for the king and was looking after him because he is dying, and she ends up going missing, and DM, as a healer herself, steps up, takes her mum's job and her place there to look after the king while trying to figure out where her mum's gone and what's happened. Is she alive? Is she dead? What's this mystery that's happening? And while that's going on, obviously, the Descended are fighting and trying to prepare for the king to pass away, and they're saying that their prince is going to be the next king. The mortals and the Descended hate each other, and for DM to get answers about her mum, she has to sort of make alliances with the prince and the Descendants to get the answers that she needs. But there's also like a civil war going on. There's a lot of politics. Don't let me talking about politics scare you. It's fantasy politics is just like the way the world works and who's in charge and the dynamics between all the characters in the world, and DM wants a better world where mortals are being treated equally with Descended. A lot of the mortals want the Descended dead, a lot of the Descended want the mortals dead. It's just so much to deal with. The way that this book is written is so interesting. I've never been as interested in fantasy politics as I have with this book, and I could read so much of it. I think the world that Penn has created is so complex. If you want to read a new fantasy book series, this is it. It has great writing, great characters, great story, great tension, banter. I love it. We're almost there. I know, this is so long. I picked up Gild by Raven Kennedy. It's the first book in the Plated Prisoner series, and this is a King Midas retelling. So King Midas is one of the main characters in this book, but it follows Orin. She is gold. She is literally gold. And apparently she was the king's favorite and he turned her to gold. But there is the kingdom here. There is unrest and potential war. There are enemies, and this book to me felt like it was a novella. Like, no story really happened, but it felt like an introduction and world building into what this world is, who the main characters are, the politics and the dynamic of how things go, and then the story sort of started. The seeds were planted, some things happened, and it was left on a cliffhanger ready for book 2 onwards to actually go through the story, because we only just met like 2 of the main characters, and I know that there's so much more to come. So for me, this was a 3 stars only because to me it felt like a novella. I read this in 2 hours. It's 300 and something pages. It was so fast to get through. It just felt like a short introductory story. So I can't stop thinking about this book, and I immediately went and ordered the rest of the books to come so I could just pick it up and start reading straight away. So that's why it was 3 stars for me. I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface of the actual story to come. I picked up A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. I haven't read her other books before. I know she has The Bridge Kingdom, but this was like a completely different type of fantasy book than one I've read or any of the other ones in this video. This has like some Norse mythology. Picture Vikings. That's this in this story. The main female character in this is so strong. It was a really interesting story to read. I thought the pace was really good. There's of course an enemies to lovers trope, betrayal. The main character was married and she tries to escape like her horrible abusive husband. Horrible husband ends up selling her out to one of the Jarls in this world who's like someone of power, and he basically challenges her to fight to the death. And when that happens, a secret comes out and our main female character Freya is thrown into this other life. There's magical powers, a war coming, and it's such an interesting story. It's very unique. I gave this 4 stars. I really loved it. I loved reading it. I don't know if I'm gonna like think about it regularly. It's so different from anything that I read that I really enjoyed it. There's supposed to be another book coming, but I don't think that's gonna come for a while. I would definitely be reading the next book and I would recommend reading this. I also want to go and pick up The Bridge Kingdom now and see what that's about. It's just something different. I feel like I read so many of the same fantasy plots and book premises. It's nice to change it up with something, and this was such a fun, easy read. And we're at the end now. The last 3 books are part of a trilogy, and it was again one of my favorite reads this month, and it is Kingdom of the Wicked. I was actually going to save these to read in June, but I've read all the books on my TBR this month early, so I picked these up and I read each book in one sitting in one day. First of all, I'm in love with Wrath. The book's set in Italy. The main female character's a witch, and the evil villains in this world are the 7 princes of hell, and they're like the 7 sins. So you got wrath, gluttony, greed, envy, pride, sloth. Can't remember who else I'm missing. The main female character, Amelia, her sister is murdered and she ends up teaming up with one of the princes of sin, who she's always been told are demons, to stay away from them, but he seems to be the only person who can help her get answers into who killed her sister and what happened. So we've got book 1, and then obviously book 2 and book 3 follow on from book 1, so I can't really talk about like the plot and what happens. All I can say is you read book 1 and you go, yeah, okay, I understand this plot, and then you read book 2 and you go, hang on, the plot's changed, and then you read book 3 and you go, this is a completely different story from what I thought it was, but it's so good. Like there's plot twists, there's drama. Book 1 has a lot of tension and like a slow burn. There are spicy bits in books 2 and 3, but I loved these. Again, really in my witch era right now. I think these were so fun, so easy to read, really fast paced. The main female character irritated me quite a bit, but the main male character, obsessed with. I think for me this is a 4-star series. I really loved it. I will be recommending these, and I know the author has it's a spin-off series focusing on one of the other brothers, and I immediately want to go and pick that up and read it because this world and like these characters I'm obsessed with. And that is every book I read in May. I am losing my voice from sitting here and talking so much. If you have made it all the way to the end and you've actually sat and watched this whole thing, then thank you. Please comment below and let me know if you have read any of these books or which one is your favorite. So thank you for watching my content. Thank you for leaving comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.